Well, thank you for the music, Lewis, our self-selected walk-up song for the subject today of scope creep. Thank you, everybody, for joining us from across the country, it looks like. I see Virginia, Ohio, California. I think you're the farthest, though I do know we had some Aussie signups. I'm sure they're getting the recording and watching after. Just some housekeeping things as we get started. As always, we do send out our recordings after, so watch in the next 48 hours, business hours, so probably Monday. You'll get an email from myself, that's kate@moovila.com, that'll have the full recording and some other resources after if you want to share it with other teammates. We also put all of our webinars on demand on our website, so you can share that with others at any time. We ask that if you have questions, you can ask them in the Q&A area. We'll be watching that, or you can ask them in the chat. Lewis and Bucky will be watching that throughout the session. And you can kind of chat us, or if you have any technical issues, write them in there as well. And thank you so much for joining us for our subject of minimizing scope creep. You can go to the next slide. Today we've got two presenters. We've got our VP of Operations, Bucky Jobe. You may know him as Addison Jobe on LinkedIn. He has an extensive project management background and oversees a lot of our MSP clients here. He's very knowledgeable in project management from Scrum Master to PMP and beyond. So tons of experience, and he's instilling that in his onboarding team here as we help onboard MSP clients. And then we also have Lewis Bagdonas, who is our senior program manager for MSPs. So he kind of straddles product as well as onboarding for MSPs here. So he's seen it all when it comes to project management at MSPs. He's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we've got both of them here today to talk about scope creep and how you can use structured project planning to improve your MSP's projects. Take it away, guys.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to talk about scope creep, especially right before Halloween, I guess, and really share what we're learning from our MSP clients as it kind of pertains to this subject. Scope creep is pretty common across basically any project, but when you're looking at professional service or service-based projects that involve your clients, it kind of takes on some special forms and we're seeing, some special case scenarios in our MSP clients and hoping to share that with you today, a little bit about what we've learned and help them through this process.
Yeah. Thanks, Bucky. And Kate, thank you for the introductions. A lot better than I could have done for myself there. So today we're going to start at a high level, walk through the basics and just the understanding of scope creep. We'll talk about some of the main causes we see specific to the MSP industry and what are those impacts associated with those causes. From there, we'll dovetail into the importance of a well-structured project plan and well-structured project planning. In addition, we'll jump into some strategies to manage that scope creep. And then, of course, we have to share some real-world examples, right? What we're seeing, what we've been through, what we've helped our clients work through. As Kate mentioned, open to questions, throw them in the chat or throw them in the Q&A. We'll be keeping an eye on both. Please, no need to wait till the end. Let's keep it interactive. As you come up with questions, go ahead and drop them in there and we'll do our best to answer. And then, of course, we will leave time at the end as well. So, Bucky, What is scope creep?
Well, let's jump into it. Well, really kind of the, textbook definition or generic definition, or, really, PMI, kind of where, all project managers go for truth is, scope creep is really kind of defined as, adding any type of project requirements without addressing those impacts on your schedule, your costs, your resources, or without having any type of customer leadership approval. What's that mean in the real world, and what does that mean to, MSPs? At its core, it's really a misunderstanding. Basically, the MSP and their customers' expectations are different and aren't aligned. and this can occur, early on, in the process or throughout the project itself. Sometimes the fault lies with the MSP for being unclear or not setting those expectations up front. Sometimes it's the customer, by not sharing, their expectations and truly communicating what is needed, by the work that's being done. But most of the time we find it's a combination of the two that really kind of sets that stage for that scope creep or unexpected changes to that project.
And, Bucky, you mentioned sometimes it is the MSP, right? And the MSP could be a large organization with a lot of different departments. Are there any departments within an MSP that you feel might be more at fault here than others?
Well, I'm an operations guy, so I'm always going to pick on it at sales. But I think really it depends. It depends on the organization, depends on the project. But let's pick on sales. A lot of times, we see kind of that unclear expectation happen early on in that sales process when the work is being scoped out. Sometimes it's communication between the sales team or that solutions architect or the design team and the project manager, really validating the work that's being done or the scope of the project. That doesn't outline those expectations with the customer. And it can also involve just communication internally from the project manager to their internal stakeholders that can cause this scope creep, and not setting those expectations or those requirements with the resources that are involved on that project.
Yeah. And you touched on a couple of the points there as well. What are some of those root causes of scope creep? And it starts at the beginning, right? It's an incomplete scope of work. And incomplete can mean a few different things. It can mean a understanding that might not be the true aspect of that project. I think it also could mean not enough details within that scope of work, right? We do see a lot of MSPs out there that when they present their scope for a certain project to a customer, they just might have a flat fixed fee on there. They try to hide all of the bill rates and hours that they used to get to those flat rates and that fixed fee, right? But we've got to have that information somewhere in the background so that the PMO knows, all right, how many hours am I supposed to be working on this specific task or whatnot? So, having those details, maybe not necessarily in front of the customer, right? Or having them in the background. With that incompletion of that scope, then comes the scheduling and the milestones, right? What is the timeline to get that work done? Obviously, those two things feed into one another. If you don't have the scope of work, it's going to be really hard to go ahead and put together that schedule and know when is that project scheduled to complete. Can we give a due date to our customer? If we bill 50% down and 50% upon completion, when can we bill that final 50%? Accounting is going to want to know, hey, this project's been going on for 6 months and, we need to know when we're going to bill it. So, that scope, that plan, that schedule, the milestone, obviously they all tie together, and the main causes of that is going to be communication. And it might not necessarily just be communication between your company and your customer, but also, as we've alluded to a little bit earlier, it's those organizations within your MSP, the sales department, the PMO, operations, accounting. Poor communication, I might argue, might be at the top of the list here of one of the major causes of scope creep. And not just communication from the beginning and throughout the process, but just kind of that culture of communication and that openness of transparency between those departments, right? As we get into a project, we've got our weekly status calls with the customers, but also maintaining those regular internal calls as well too. So all of the people involved in that project and all the stakeholders are on the same page, and you're knowing what you're communicating out to the customers. And then, of course, lack of project management, right? If we take on a project and we don't have those dedicated resources, we're not striving to hit our dates, to maintain our margins. We don't have somebody helping to assign those tasks, push those goals, and push those tickets onto the specific engineers. Then, of course, as new work comes in, nobody's truly understanding the full plan of that project. And we're just going to have scope creep continue to just creep on in. And then, and thank you, Bucky, you laughed there, you got it. And then if there's a lack of project management, right, then there's probably not a lot of change control process, right? What is the basic steps we need to take as new work comes in, as a project is ongoing? Also, it can be as easy as just making sure internally within your company that you have a definition for scope creep, right? Bucky alluded to the standard industry, PMP, PMI definition that is dollars, hours, schedule. Set that for your organization, whether it's 1 hour, 10 hours, $1 or $10,000, right? What defines scope creep? And then once we are able to identify and say, hey, this is scope keeper on this project, what's the next step? Is it an internal meeting? Is it a meeting with the customer? Is that spinning it off as a new project or taking it in to that project, but now a totally separate phase that's going to be time and material compared to the fixed fee that you've budgeted initially for the customer?
And Lewis, just to chime in here, you make a really valid point of having that process and that definition. That change control process doesn't always have to be billable or material changes to the project. It should be anything that's outside of that original scope that's going to require changes to that project, and having that process in place. And those changes need to be communicated out. They need to be analyzed. They need to be factored into the project, and then also communicated out, even if it's not directly with the customer. But it's always good to bring the customer in and let them know what's happening as well, to create that level of trust and transparency. And just kind of looking at all these causes, there's a common thread here across a lot of this. It has a lot to do with defined processes and tool sets too. Making sure that to address these, you have the right processes in place, the right people working together in those processes with clearly defined roles, and then tool sets that work together and help combat this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as these causes impact our projects, what are some of the impacts? And we can maybe tie a direct correlation, but I would say that all of these causes, and these aren't all the causes of scope creep, right? There's plenty of them out there. These are some of the top main ones we see within MSPs, but they all lead to missed deadlines, right? No schedule, no milestones. We're not going to be able to hit those deadlines for our customers that were initially set. A lot of internal conflict and confusion, right? Project management office saying, well, the scope wasn't accurate. Solutions architect saying, well, you never informed me on the last project, right? Fighting internally, whose fault is it? We also see, of course, overwork employees, right? We've got to commit to a date to a customer. They're a new client that we need to onboard, and we have to have them onboarded by a certain point when their other contract with their previous MSP runs up, right? So we've got to hit those dates, and that leads to overworked employees. And of course, we don't hit that date, we have unhappy customers, right? Ultimately, all of these causes, all of these impacts lead to unhappy customers as well. And then the biggest one, right? Over budget. We're not hitting our margins that we expected. We're over budget, right? We've got a simple little box here that, unclear expectations lead to an inaccurate plan. An inaccurate plan is going to lead to lower margins. And at the end of the day, we need to be able to maintain our margins. Of course, it's important for us to get that recurring revenue and those managed service contracts. But if we're not paying attention and we allow scope creep to continue to come in on our projects, before we know it, our professional services margin is just going to start to drag down that other margin within our organization. So now that we've gone through the heavy stuff, we'll jump over to the fun part of importance of structured project planning, what it can do for you and how it can help fight scope creep.
Well, Lewis, I'll jump in here. And I kind of alluded to this, as we talked about that cause is that, a lot of those causes are from process and tool set. So if we look at, important of a structured project plan, this kind of goes beyond just the plan itself. It's the process that are involved in that planning. And that all starts with, defining that work, that statement of work, that scope of work with your customer, identifying, what the deliverables are, what is planning to be accomplished and getting an agreement on that. Setting that budget, knowing, how much it's going to cost the customer, what your budget is, so you can convert that into, managing the budget for your project to making sure that you're profitable. And then, by clearly outlining what is required, that can be, each one of those items can be, turned into that project schedule. And what that project schedule does is by having a, well-defined project schedule, that helps you understand, do you have the resources available? When can you kick that project off? And then also communicating that back to the customer and saying, this is when we're going to deliver these items. This is when the project's going to be complete. And then by having that schedule post kickoff is, going through and managing to that schedule. So as things do change on a project, kind of one of the things that I always say, the only constant in a project is change. By having a clearly well-structured plan, it allows us to actually go in, manage the project, but also manage and accommodate that change that's coming in. It helps us to, identify it early and then react to it, or respond to it, not necessarily react to it. So, putting all this together, this plan, it, helps, set that expectations with your customer, and then also setting those expectations internally with your team, so they know when the work needs to be done, and making sure that everything's delivered on time and they have responsibility in that. So, what does that equate to? Like I said, clear expectations. By having that plan, you can maintain your margins, make sure you're tracking correctly. So if there does, if something does, go over on hours, we can try to make that up somewhere else, so managing that throughout, making sure we're meeting those timelines that have been planned and communicated back to the customer. We've already talked about, looking at those resources and making sure that we have the capability to deliver when we said we're going to deliver, and then maximizing those resources as well. Without having a plan, you can't, really detect or resolve issues proactively or ahead of time, and see the downstream impact of any issues that are happening. All this like kind of working together, creates that trust with the customer and enhances that customer satisfaction, making sure that you have, communicated those expectations to the customer and then having that plan to deliver on them.
Right. So of course, the importance of that project and that structured project planning is the first of managing that scope creep, right? The strategy to manage that scope creep. But do you mind walking us, Bucky, through a couple others?
Yeah, and and Lewis, I already, kind of went through this, but it all starts with understanding our customer needs, and that's kind of the core building block of that relationship. You're there to provide them a service, spending the time with them to truly understand their needs. That's going to be that building block for that scope of work and defining that work. Which is going to, then, roll into that, structuring and building out that project plan. That scope of work area, having, experiences in my professional career and also working with other MSPs, a lot of times, you'll talk to a vendor or a provider and say, hey, I need this done. And they just send you over scope, you sign it, and you move forward. We've seen some of our customers, really have some big wins with actually spending time with their customer and reviewing that scope of work, line by line, and making sure that they understand it. there's a lot of times you have to understand your customers are hiring you for your expertise, and they may not have an understanding of all the things. So as you review that with them, you may be able to find out some of those hidden customer needs that can later, contribute to that scope creep. So, having that kind of, that feedback loop, or that conversation around those first two is really important. And, that'll feed into making sure that we have a good structured plan, and, having good dates that we can communicate to the client, and then a good plan to manage too. You know, all of this, clearing up that communication. This is one of the main causes that Lewis talked about. Having that clear communication up front, as we see, understanding the customer needs, but also as it moves into the project management phase, having that project manager, kick off the project, spend time with the client to review that project plan with them, and then setting up regular cadence for status and how project status will be communicated. Also, on the other side, communication internally with that project manager, whoever's managing that project, making sure that they're communicating with the resources, treating their internal resources as customers as well. This goes back to those internal processes you have, internal meetings, and it can also, go back to your tool set you have, making sure that you have a good system to manage the project, track communication, create transparency around the work, things like that. And then, of course, having that change control process, which we already talked about in the cause and impacts area, making sure that, anytime that there's change on that project, we have a process to identify it, to analyze it, and then communicate it. So, change on that project is going to have impacts that's going to impact your customer, and also your internal resources. And the last and finally, I think is probably the most important, because there's so many factors that go into having good processes and systems within your company, is really kind of developing that continuous, improvement kind of mindset around how you deliver projects. Looking at these processes, after a project has been completed, going back in, what do we do well? What do we do bad? What can we improve? And then feeding that back in to the sales process. So you can better scope your work and have better project success in the future. If I look at all of these, I think, the last one is probably the most important to profitability and margin long term, but it's probably the first one that we don't do because we're all so busy. Everybody hates going back at the end of a project and kind of doing a lessons learned and a review on that. But really, tightening up our process and better quoting new incoming work is actually going to improve our margins and our profitability long term. So it is probably the most important to start building that, into your project management culture, if possible. That's
we've even seen to that point, right? I mean, Bucky's spot on. It is the most impactful to long-term margin and profitability for your company. But it's the project's done. We got to move on to the next one. Let's forget about it. We've seen MSPs that the last task in their project is a project review and a template or a scope update, right? They can't close that project out until that very last ticket is closed out, and they've got their project engineers, their project managers, and potentially even the solutions architect that did that original scope on that project, review it, all understand what went well, what went wrong, what do we need to update for the future. So that way, when we get into the next project, we're not having to look back and say, what happened last year when we did that firewall configuration for these guys? Were we over hours? Were we under, right? We've got to move on to the next one. So really making that last step in your project.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lewis. One thing I'd like to add to that, is making sure it's data driven. Make sure that you're doing the tracking throughout that project so you can make those comparisons, budget versus actual, plan timeline against, actual timeline, things like that, to make sure that, it's more of a quantitative exercise than a qualitative. Both sides are important, but having that data to go back and see where you can tighten it up in the future.
Yep, absolutely. So speaking of tightening it up, let's talk through some real world examples. We'd love if anybody wants to volunteer and drop them in the chat and let us know, hey, this happened on this project. How would you have handled it? We're more than happy to just take a stab. So one that we see quite often in the MSP space is, our sales team is always out closing, right? They're out working, and we've got to build that culture, right? But they're always out there working, looking for those new customers that lead to those long-term managed service contracts that give us that recurring revenue that drives our valuation, right? And we absolutely need to continue to do that to grow our business. But the first project we see MSPs typically take on for new customers is their onboarding, right? That's going to be our true first interaction between the MSP and the customer, how both organizations operate, and get a taste of how this relationship's going to work, right? So we really need to be sure, and we see this happen all the time where the sales team is out, they're closing the deals, they're bringing them in, and they might just take a stab and say, they've got 100 employees, so they have 100 workstations. Little do we find out when we get into the onboarding that every employee has a cell phone that needs to be reviewed. They've got a workstation. They also have a tablet. They also have computers out in the warehouse. They have computers, for FedEx printing. So, really making sure, again, we have that clear defined scope so that when we get into that project, we know what we've got to handle. And we know that if something comes up, we're going to address it. This really ties into going the extra mile, and say when you bring that customer in and you typically don't charge for an onboarding, but maybe you need to make some upgrades to their network. You're going to say, hey, I really want to get this contract. Typically, this project to upgrade your network would cost X, but I'm going to give you a discount. Clearly communicating that discount to that customer so they know that this is not the normal price, right? So that if that customer goes on down the line, they acquire another company that then you have to roll under and manage all of those endpoints, they understand that, okay, if I need network upgrades for them, it's going to cost this, right? I got that discount initially, but setting that expectation so you and your customer know how each other works, right? Knowing that you're not just going to start raising prices on them halfway through their contract and they go, what the heck? I've been used to $100 an hour. Why am I now getting charged $200, right? And then with that, going the extra miles in those onboardings and in those projects, we all of us deal with those small, medium-sized businesses that a lot of times are family owned. So that includes handling grandma's Wi-Fi down at her house, right? I have done it. I've worked for a family-owned business, and for some reason, because I was the youngest guy, I would have to handle the Wi-Fi, right? But as you get asked to do those things, it's important to go the extra mile and make our customers happy. It's the same sort of strategy there with those discounts, just making sure it's recognized. Obviously, clear that by your manager. Say, hey, I'm going to have to spend an hour out of my day today to go double check our new customer's Wi-Fi at his house because he asked me to, and I'm the IT guy, right? Clear that with the manager and say, this is why I want to do it. We see growth with this customer, all those good things, but really making sure that that customer understands it. Because if we continue to just do those things, then they're going to eat not only into the margin on that project, but all the other projects for all the other customers in our portfolio. And then they're going to expect all of those things in the future on, Christmas Eve when their Wi-Fi is down. Who do you think they're gonna call for help with the Wi-Fi at their house?
Lewis, one kind of valid point about that. If you sitting in the customer's chair, they ask you to do something. It's 15 minutes here, it's 20 minutes there. They don't remember that. They remember the relationship, and building that relationship is important. But we've seen customers, make sure that they track that time, and communicate it to the customer as non-billable. So, when they're looking at those invoices coming in, that they're, seeing that time, that extra time that has been spent to continue and build that relationship. So in the future, when say, hey, I did this for you last time, but I do have to charge you for it. It is taking time from my resources to do that. It's making sure that we track that, and then also, as we're looking at improving our processes, that we have that documentation. It's death by a thousand cuts. That can really ruin these margins or ruin profitability, and then set up that continued expectation moving forward as well with that customer.
Yeah. And it also alludes to what you'd mentioned earlier, Bucky, about making it data driven, right? As you're documenting that and you have to go back, those aren't sometimes the easiest conversations to have with customers. Hey, I can't keep setting up your Wi-Fi for you. If you have that data to show all that time that you've entered, right? It makes that conversation a lot easier for you. So last one we thought we wanted to talk about here was the never ending project, right? We've all had them, the 6, 8, 10, 12 month, they go on forever. Some of the ones we've seen with some of our customers might be an ERP implementation or system conversion. There's a lot that can go on over the life cycle of that project. One of the things that we've seen is new stakeholders come in at your company or come in at your customer's company, and they might come in and say, okay, along with this ERP for this distribution center that we're setting up as a third party for Amazon, we want to go ahead and drop MRP in there as well too, right? That's a massive hit to this project, to that original scope that we've built out, that timeline, all those deadlines that we've worked so hard to build out. So we've got to take that on, right? We've said it now a couple of times, but we've got to have that data, be able to show and analyze what that would do to our project, and have those conversations and figure out, okay, can this be thrown into this project? What is it going to do to our billing? Is this now an additional phase for time material, like we said earlier? Or is this a totally separate project, right? Do we need to get through this implementation first? And then once we feel comfortable 6 months down the road, then we can go ahead and take on the MRP, right? So maybe it's a program approach instead of throwing everything into one project.
Yeah, Lewis, you make an interesting point there. Is it a separate project? We've seen this with our clients. It's one customer. We're gonna be doing all the work, right now. So we're just gonna put it together in one project plan. Even though it's different types of work, you mentioned, oh, we got onboarding, and then we've got a network upgrade, and maybe we got a firewall installer, and we got a new facility as well. But we're just going to put that all into one project. It's the same customer, it's easier, things like that. But you have to remember is each one of those projects are different pieces of work. They're going to involve different resources within your organization. They're probably going to involve different resources of your customer as well. And they're going to be possibly running in parallel or different timelines, things like that. It always makes sense to, if you can, separate out that work into individual projects so they can be managed, separately, and then, kind of organized as a program. So, you can review all that work with the customer, but you're managing different plans around that. Long projects just by nature introduce additional risk. So going back to well-structured plans and thinking through how we structure that work is even more important, because the bigger and the more complex it gets, the more risk that is hiding in there. That's where Mr. Murphy likes to live. I'm assuming everybody's familiar with Murphy's Law. So
yeah, absolutely. So just a couple examples, right? We could sit here and go on for hours and hours and hours and hours, but I think we've probably talked enough at you about scope creep. I haven't seen any questions come in yet, so I'm going to assume that nobody has any issues with scope creep. No? Oh, do we have we got one question in here. So do you think it is more efficient to just do a single project for a quick a single ticket for a quick project, or run it as a full-blown project? You want me to take it?
I think we're probably going to say
Both
this.
say you're going to say it in the count of three. One,
Yeah, it
two,
depends.
three. It depends.
Yeah.
So as you listen to Bucky, we say that a lot, but it does, right? And it does depend on your organization. I think it's a great question, right? What is the burden of administration for that project? And I think it all starts with, we talked about how do we have a definition of scope creep for our organization, have a definition for what's a project for your organization, right? If it is something that can be managed out of a ticket and the burden of administration isn't there to go ahead and build out that full project plan, have that kickoff meeting, set up your billing milestones, yeah, it might make sense to run it out of a ticket. But that also can get really dangerous as we just keep adding on and piling on. It's really easy to just add resources and schedule events on a ticket and continue to clock time on a ticket. And before you know it, what you thought would take 8 hours, you're looking at 30 hours and you go, oh, I've just lost a lot of money doing this body of work here.
I think that's the important thing, Lewis, is putting guardrails around it. I'm trying to remember the customer we have where they have projects, which, really, address that, that question. It's, they put some guardrails around that. It's like, it's only going to require one resource. It's less than a week, or, duration is less than a few days or a week or something like that. It goes back to how you guys define it. And it's that balance between, value versus administration. If you're going to spend a lot of time, building out a project plan for something that is, 2 or 3 steps within a ticket, or, tasks within that ticket, it's probably easier just to get a ticket, move on, make the customer happy. So,
Yep, absolutely. All right. Any others? Let's see. Give it
Awesome.
a couple more minutes. We can hang out. Of course, as Kate mentioned, we'll send out a recording of the webinar afterwards. Our emails. Oh, we got a question.
I'm going to put my email. Everyone has it as well.
Do you see that one? I think most of us probably know why and how we're bad at projects. How can Moovila help?
well,
Bucky,
yeah.
let you lead it off.
Let's number one, let's go back a slide.
No, yeah, good point.
And book a demo. Our sales team can go through the details of it, but at its core, I'm going to be completely honest. We know that the systems that MSPs work in, their PSAs, they're really good at managed services. They're really bad at project management. So the problem is a lot of organizations, have shared resources across managed services, across, project services as well. So, not having that tool set and the connection between, they may be using a separate tool for project management or trying to manage it within their PSA. It's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you do it in the PSA, you don't have the tools to actually plan a good project, a good timeline, a good budget, all of those things that surround good project management. Or if you go to a project management tool, it's not connected in your PSA. So you can't have, look at your resource allocation, communicate across the two systems and things like that. That's where Moovila really shines, beyond just, being a, industry leading project management platform. We actually connect into your PSA. I would definitely suggest, we could spend another hour very easily talking about how Moovila can help. I would suggest, schedule a demo with our sales team, and we'll go into those details and answer all your questions about how Moovila can help your project management team.
Yeah, I think you hit it spot on there, Bucky. The only other thing I would add is, you heard earlier, Kate introduced Bucky. He's got all the certifications, PMP, Scrum Master, gone through them all. I'm more of what we call an accidental project manager, right? I've got 10 years of experience of it, right? And most of the time, project managers come out of people that are organized. They have that, what do you call it, Bucky, the curse of competency. They can get things done on time, and you just get thrown into the mix, right? Moovila does a good job of understanding that most project managers are like that, right? And we give you the tools and the coaching within our platform to not just build those structured plans, but to understand why.
Absolutely. And then, the operations team here, helps you with that, walking through, going through your processes, we're your partner in implementation and help you guys, maximize usage from Moovila and kind of meet you where you're at today, and then help you, improve in the future.
Yep.
Bucky's not going to say it here, but that's one of our brag points. If you read our reviews on Channel Program or some of the other spots, Bucky's team gets a large round of applause because we get a lot of good reviews for the onboarding and the high touch that we do with the project management here. It looks like we have one more question in the chat. If you guys want to address that one, I think that'll be our last one because we're coming up close to time.
Do you have suggestions for how to understand how far off budget you are once the project starts to get out of control? We've seen this one for sure when we're working, just defining work estimate or budgeted hours on tasks, right? So back to a lot of what we've hit on this webinar so far, and we're trying to keep it simple. I think one of the first things is that communication there. What is your cadence for communication internally and with your customers so that everybody's on the same page of how far along this project are we? That also can get tricky because if we're trying to look at maybe a percent complete on a project, if we look at it based on number of tickets, we could have 8 out of tickets finished, but maybe ticket number 9 has 20 hours compared to where the first 8 hours only had 4 total. So really to understand how far you are from your scope and from your budget is checking in on that on a regular cadence. However, you need to define that and look at it, whether it's percentage of tickets, total hours. If it's a fixed fee project, then we're really going to be watching our cost against what we thought our initial cost was going to be. And at the most basic level, we can start at just total number of hours, right? Did we budget 100 hours? How many hours are we through at this point?
Lewis, one of the things, kind of listening to you answer that, if possible, going back to a well-structured plan, is planning out that hours for that task work that's taking place. So, you can monitor as you're going on. It's important to look at, almost in real time, what your budget versus your actual is. So you can start seeing things trending, out of line before it gets out of control. Out of control is kind of mentioned in that question. So, having that be part of your monitor control process as you're managing that project. And then once you see things, I guess it's smoke before there's fire. It's having that smoke detector, which, Moovila does very well. Going in, assessing that risk, getting it back in line. And if you can't get it back in line, accept that risk and see where you can course correct in the future before all of a sudden you're at the end of the project looking in that rearview mirror and trying to figure out what happened.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you everybody for attending today. There'll be a brief survey that pops up as you leave. We would love if you could fill it out. Thank you, Bucky and Lewis, for taking the time out of your day. I know this isn't your normal role to be doing a session. We've got a team here. If you're interested in a session beyond the demo and things like that, if you're interested in just like consulting or a peer group that you're a part of, that Bucky and Lewis actually go on the road and they do way more deep dive, extensive trainings on project management with peer groups. So if that's something you're interested, you can email us. I put my email in the chat. And thank you everybody for coming today, and have a great one.